Hello, my name is Tina White. I'm with the Asheville View, and I am here today with Alan Muskat, the CEO of No Taste Like Home. It is the largest foraging company in the world, and it's right here in Asheville. Alan, how are you today?
Great, thank you.
So, why foraging?
Well, I started out doing it for myself, and then I did it for restaurants for many years, and now I teach other people. So my company is takes people out to eat, is what I like to say. And why do it at all? I got out of college wanting to get out of the system and eat healthy food and not have to have a job. And eventually that's the job I came up with, it's just to supply or teach others. But there's a lot of reasons to forage, and some of them I wasn't aware of when I started, and I could run through those.
Well, why did you start?
I think that it's a little hard to say exactly. It was clear that I was foraging like after college, and that in college I went hiking for the first time. I cooked for myself for the first time in a co-op that was into whole foods, and I learned about organic foods. I mean, I was Burger King eating. This was all new. On the other hand, I did grow up with a family that liked going to yard sales. And to me, like, going in your yard to get stuff for free is like going to a yard sale, but the prices are better. So it's not just from college, but I wasn't really, picking mushrooms as a child. I mean, maybe avocados because I'm from Miami.
We talk about foraging. What do you forage for? I mean, what's the breadth of foodstuffs?
There's mushrooms. That's what most people think of when you go foraging, but there's plant foods, and those have a bunch of categories, from the ground up. I mean, underground, you'd get roots, and at the other end of the season, seeds and nuts and fruits and berries, and in between, the leaves, like for salad or for greens. You can pick the shoots in the spring as well, and even the twigs or the bark can be edible or used for flavoring. Yeah. And
before we go into the why of foraging, do you need to be in a special forest or a rarefied place to find all these things?
No, that's what's surprising to most people. You'll find more wild food in the city than you will in the woods.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Well, people imagine, if you're on a survival show, you're going to be out in nature and having to, fend for yourself. And it's true, that would actually be harder than if I was dropped off, in the middle of like New York or any city, because what is mostly edible to us are weeds, and the weeds come up where the sun is shining, and the sun shines where we've cleared. As you know, in a garden, you'll get weeds.
Huh. That's a good reason to stop weeding. Thank you.
Yeah.
So talk about foraging. Why would someone who has never done it want to do it?
Well, over time, like I said, I realized there are 7 reasons. Those are the categories that I would put a lot of the things I've asked people, why do you do this? A lot of times people don't know. And so they only say the 7th reason. But the first one is that it's free. So like I said, I didn't want to have to make money. And when I did decide to make money, I could actually sell the stuff. So you can save money and you can make money with wild foods. The second reason I would say is that it's sustainable. So if you're concerned about the earth, I mean, this is food that grows itself. And so it doesn't need any of the chemical inputs that we do, to force the earth to produce what we want where it doesn't really belong. And then thirdly, it's not only healthier for the earth, it's healthier for us. So this is what we evolved to eat. And that's what makes it like ultra paleo, you could say. And I mean, when you look at people going low carb or grain free, and wanting omega-3s in their diet or gluten-free, these are all going back to what we had before agriculture and when we were hunter-gatherers. So that makes it healthier for you. So that's sort of 3. And the 4th is it gives you a certain amount of independence. There are people who are preppers, right? So they're afraid that the system will fall apart and they want to be able to feed themselves. And so it gives you that self-reliance. I would say the fifth is a reconnection to the earth. So it's kind of a spiritual reason that some people come to it for that. And that's lately my favorite reason, and we'll talk a lot about that. But I'd say the sixth is the reason most people today come to it, which I call the foodie reason. It's, it's fun and it's novel is what I would say, and interesting. It's also fresher and tastier. And so people who are the opposite of poor, but are rich and have had everything there is to eat, have not had some of like wild foods that are exotic because they're in their yard and they never imagined that this would be edible. Yeah.
So I thought about foraging as I was preparing to talk to you, and I thought about why wouldn't I? And I thought of three things. Maybe you could help me get through them.
Yeah.
One is fear.
Yeah.
I'm terrified that I'm going to, knucklehead Tina's going to pick up the wrong thing. And how, if my goal is to become an expert, but perhaps just in the 2 acres around my house to learn 5 or 6 things that I could regularly forage for, is that hard to do?
Well, that's all relative. So if you took a hunter-gatherer, out of, the bush who's never driven, and you ask them to drive you somewhere, it will be hard to do. And if you try foraging today on your own without help, it will be hard to do. And you could kill yourself either way, depending on what you're used to doing. So it's all relative, but I can tell you that BC, before Costco, everyone foraged, and if it was that hard, we would have gone extinct. Like toddlers forage, right? They put everything in their mouths. And if it was so dangerous to do that, we wouldn't be here today.
The second thing I thought about, do you need, if you decide that you want to forage more frequently for food and cook it, prepare it, do you need special equipment? Is your kitchen different from most people's?
I have more strainers.
Okay.
There's a lot of things in the woods or in nature that are tougher than you'd want to necessarily swallow. So you might actually extract a lot of the flavors or the nutrition out of things that are too chewy. Say like wheatgrass, or people are, feel it's healthy, but they press out the juice. They don't eat that. We're not evolved to actually eat it. Otherwise, I can't think of any other difference. I have a Vitamix for really tough things. Not everything is very tough. A lot of it is just as tender as what you'd get in the store, but some are.
When you take people on your foraging expeditions, how long are they typically? What is it like?
Well, we go out typically for 3 hours, and in that time, you get an introduction, but mostly a experience. After we tell you things to watch out for, we give you a basket and a knife, and we sometimes spread out. If there's enough to find, it helps for everyone to go in a different direction, and you get a real experience, unmediated, of gathering a bunch of stuff. We all bring it back, we all lay it out, and we learn what's edible and what's not, and we mix and match. I actually have the participants put together the things that look the same so that they can start to get a sense. And by the end, most of them feel like, wow, I could do this. And at the end, we cook up some of what we found. And the rest they could take to a restaurant. We have 8 restaurants that will cook up for free in an appetizer the stuff that you foraged.
If you were there.
Huh?
If you were there.
If you foraged with us, yeah.
Right, yeah.
Well, we have 8 guides, and it would be one of us who had looked through it all and sent it to the restaurant in like a sealed bag. And someday the restaurants might take things because the chef can often have the skill. And I have a vision that most restaurants in Asheville would be taking things from people who didn't go out with us, because we would have a culture of knowledge. Just like, someone might bring a fish to a seafood place and have them cook it. That's pretty typical. It's not unusual.
So it sounds good, but isn't farming or just a little victory garden easier?
Well, you'd think so. And it's actually a big mystery of why we started farming ever, because it's not easier. I actually have trouble getting enough exercise, even though foraging gets you out, and that's one of the benefits. It's just this morning, you know, I went out, I thought I should go for a walk, but I immediately ran into a big patch of chickweed, which is like a salad green, and I spent the rest of the morning filling my basket, which was very enjoyable. And you still get, you know, sunshine on a sunnier day. But it is not hard. I mean, many people, for instance, think of acorns as being a lot of trouble to make them edible. And in their yard, it's just, you know, trash for the squirrels. But then they turn around and, you know, maybe they make a pie or go to work for 40 hours a week. And like, that's more time than it takes to forage. I mean, around the world, the average amount of time that foragers spend working, if you can call foraging working, is 20, 30 hours a week, you know? And those people aren't paying rent, you know? And that work also includes, like, you know, maintaining your clothing. That's like everything that we have to do. They do it within those 30 or so hours. I mean, we have to work 40 hours a week, a lot of us, and then take care of, you know, the kids, the taxes, like, you know, fixing stuff, buying stuff. I don't know what else we spend our time watching television.
Yeah. All right, so you've got me sold in foraging. Mm-hmm. So I've got my basket.
Yeah.
I go out somewhere. Am I going to get arrested? Are there any reason? Can I get in trouble foraging?
Well, I got arrested, basically. And another one of the really well-known teachers did get in trouble, and you can. So you want to make sure it's legal. In Europe, there's a lot of countries where it's legal by default. As long as you're not like within sight of someone's house, you could walk anywhere on a tract of property and forage. But not here, not in, you know, the land of the free. And on public land, you would think you could forage, and that's not true in most state parks, in most national parks, but in national forest, it varies. And for personal use, which you don't need a permit, you can do it on your own or a license, and it's typically limited by, say, a pound of a given species per day per person. So you could get up to a pound of blueberries and then up to a pound of mushrooms, etc., each day. Or you can get a permit that allows you to get, say, 20 pounds or 100 pounds of something. So it is regulated to some extent. And when I got sort of, quote, arrested, I actually got a subpoena because I was not foraging without a permit, but teaching without a permit.
Oh, my word.
Yeah. I got in trouble for that.
You talk about, well, first let's just, your book. You have a book, actually, that covers this, although you've told me that you tell people you can't learn this from a book.
Right.
So tell me about your book and then what I should and shouldn't do with your book.
Yeah, the other night I was at an author's house, and he is really peeved about me being against books, particularly given that I'm writing a very long one right now. But I think I just added a line after talking to him that I wanted mine to be the anti-book, or the book to end all books. Because if there's anything I want people to know is, like, when you ask whether this is hard, I think Bette Midler had a line. She said, like, if sex is so natural, how come there's so many books about it? because we're disconnected. Just like the person who can't drive, they didn't grow up with it. So if we grow up with it, it's easy, and you don't learn from a book. You don't ask a hunter-gatherer, like, what book do you recommend? I mean, it's a ridiculous question because you just learn from your parents. Here's a really good analogy that another forager in the 60s would use, and he ended up writing a number of books. But he said, can you tell cabbage from iceberg lettuce? What would you say? Yeah. Right, so did you go to school to learn the difference?
I think Mark Twain said that cabbage is lettuce with a college education.
Oh, really?
I think so.
Well, I've yet to meet somebody who, can't tell the difference without having gone to college, right?
Right.
Because they look very similar, but eventually, having growing up with it, if you did, you just absorb that without trying. So my book isn't designed for someone to use it in lieu of having someone else. In fact, a lot of the book's devoted to saying that you should find a person to learn from. And in an ideal world, that'll be free because it'd be your parents or it'd be your neighbor or your grandparents. And that's where I'm hoping to get to with this.
At the very start of our conversation, you mentioned that there are much deeper reasons for foraging. And I know that you have a lot of thoughts about foraging versus agriculture and Costco and other economic models. What's the deeper reason to do big forage?
Well, I'm not harping just on Costco. It just gives me good initials to make fun of. But I will say that the last of the 7 reasons is fun. And my book is titled Leela, which is play in Sanskrit. And there's something very deep and profound about having fun, although people don't realize it when they say, oh, this is really fun. They're actually feeling the reconnection, which is reason number 5, and the empowerment, and the fact that it's free because it's like a shopping spree. And so what they're doing is recapitulating the Garden of Eden. And they're reversing the fall. So, it's a myth that a lot of people are familiar with, but I think that there's a lot of depth to that through the lens that I spend a lot of my book talking about. So my book is more about why to forage than how. And I'm hoping that if they're convinced of why, then they will find someone to learn how. And the opposite of the fun and the play, the opposite of play is work. And a lot of hunter-gatherers, they don't have a word for work. They don't consider anything work. They enjoy everything, and it's play for them. So things aren't fun when they're serious. And they're serious when you feel, like you said a minute ago, afraid. So what's really deep about foraging and the shift that I see when we stopped foraging and started agriculture is that we started being afraid of nature. And thinking we had to grow food. Food doesn't grow itself. We have to provide for ourselves because the world or Mother Nature or God, it's all the same to me, is not going to provide for us. And Jesus said, you don't have to put up food, nature will provide for you. Look, birds don't store up food. Don't worry about tomorrow. It's very profound. So it's a spiritual practice to forage because you're not eating man's food, you're eating God's food. And on the cover of Leela, I have the Michelangelo, where like God and Adam are almost touching, except I put a mushroom being handed from one to the other. So that it's like a little synapse is bridged by the food. When I pick something from a tree, I feel like I'm in church, or I'm actually not touching God, but there's an intermediary there. I'm experiencing providence, right? Being provided for is providence. It's very real.
So I, like most people conditioned in our culture, go immediately to the efficiency of foraging because I'm thinking of it as, is this an efficient way for me to extract such and such a product? And you're pointing out that once you're into foraging, that's not even how you think about it because you're not extracting, you're immersing yourself. Is that, am I beginning to get it?
Yeah. The very word foraging, I sat down in my house with a couple from Vermont who will not use that word because the word comes from the French, which means to pillage. And you think, oh gosh, you just talked about extraction, right? And here I am promoting foraging. Am I promoting pillaging, which is, a systematized extraction? Well, in my feeling, true foraging is what agriculture has been for, say, 10,000 years or so. It's enslaving nature to give you what you want. And so, yeah, you're right. I don't look at foraging as extraction, but it's a partnership. And it's a playing with. It's not putting to work or working for. So it's an equal playing field.
But I guess the other question I have is it sustainable? If everyone started foraging, A, would it hurt the forest, and B, is there enough for to really sustain an economy?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't think that should stop us. When I talked to Steve Brill, another big foraging educator, he said worrying about everyone starting to forage is like worrying about everyone stopping driving and riding bikes, and that the roads will be clogged with bikes. Right? So is that really a problem? Like, look at what we're doing now. Like right now, agriculture, which a lot of us blindly adhere to, is way more destructive than foraging could ever be.
Huh.
The most destructive thing we've ever done is try to grow food. So when you worry about there not being enough, there's not enough now. I mean, the only reason our population is this big is because we've gone out on a limb with a system of growing food that is actually it's a negative rate of return. The energy gone in, you don't actually get as much out as you put in. But since we have plenty of oil that has been cheap for 50 or say 100 years, it's all petroleum based. And that may run out, and if it doesn't, it's also a carbon issue with climate change. But we are living on credit either way, per se. And we can't continue what we're doing now, and what we're doing now has been immensely destructive. But when I say foraging, again, most people think, oh yeah, everyone's just going to go out and get as much as they want, and of course it's going to be a free-for-all, figuratively and literally. And that may be true, because our attitude is that everyone is out for themselves. But that's not how foragers operate. True hunter-gatherers have community. Even if someone tried to get more for themselves, they call this the tragedy of the commons. No one would tolerate that. So we don't have those safeguards in place anymore, because we created a system where, the more you screw everyone else over, the better you do. That's not how it used to be. So what we need first and foremost is a culture of unity, which hunter-gatherers not only feel with nature, but they feel with each other.
Do families or companies, groups, ever use this to sort of build a team? Or because you talk about how it changes the culture. Can you change the culture of your family, your organization, by learning to forage together?
Yeah, that'd be a good line. The family that forages together stays together. I like to say it's a family gathering, like gathering. And I haven't done a lot of corporate work, and the problem, of course, is that corporations in particular, they're designed to extract. By law, they have to maximize profit.
Right. And
so they extract from their own employees. So as long as you have a hierarchy of exploitation, foraging is not going to change that. You might want to forage some psychedelic mushrooms. It might help if you're lucky. But it's a very uphill battle, and that's what my book is mostly about. It's a cultural change. It's not just about how we eat. It's about how we think. Are we afraid? Because it all starts from that.
So what I've heard is that this is about much more than just foraging in the sense of extracting food from nature. It's about really changing your relationship with food and nature. And if someone wants to learn how to forage from you or your team, where would they go?
Well, yes, I recommend from a person. And I'm trying to make money off of people. They can come, if you're local, you can come for free. It's by donation. We mostly have tourists, so it's not obvious. But if anyone in Asheville, even if they're not from Asheville, comes, whatever they want to pay is fine. We're making plenty of money. I believe in abundance. Like, nature doesn't charge us for this abundance. And that's an inconvenience for people across the country if they're watching this. So there are lists of foraging teachers that I link to on my website. And the company that teaches here is called No Taste Like Home. And so it's notastelikehome.org. where you find our classes, which we call tours, because we have mostly tourists, and we make it fun. We also have 10-week immersion, we call it, that happens spring, summer, and fall. And so someone who's, I was going to say serious, but that word's not okay. Someone who wants to play for more than 3 hours can do that if they're local. And that's how to find us. And I, again, really recommend a human being. Yeah.
Fantastic. Alan, thank you very much.
You're welcome.